Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm here in Itapetininga, which is a small town in the countryside of Sao Paulo, and it's late afternoon, so the sun is starting to set. And I found this small garden. You've got these banana trees in the back, bananeras, and they're getting lit by the backlight of the sun, so they have this really lovely yellowish bright green glow. And then this tree, which is an avocado tree, and again it's got quite interesting leaves, big leaves, and I think it'll be quite a nice scene to paint, looking at the light and the light effects on the different plants typical to Brazil.
I'm painting on an oil primed linen canvas that I've toned with a light wash of raw umber paint. The thing which has really drawn me to this scene is this evening sunlight shining through the banana tree leaves and lighting the green foliage, creating this bright, chromatic, yellowish green glow. And I want to frame these light greens against the dark green of this avocado tree in the foreground. I start by sketching in the big shapes in the scene by drawing the contour of the avocado tree, as well as marking the top of the garden wall and the ground in the foreground. Here I'm massing in the dark shapes in the scene using a wash of thinned down paint consisting of raw umber and emerald green for the avocado tree, and carmine red, raw umber, and a touch of yellow ochre and a small touch of cobalt blue for the foreground shadows on this rich red Brazilian soil. As the thing which really drew me to this scene was the sunlight shining through the trees and illuminating these large banana leaves, creating this vibrant glow, you may wonder why I haven't just zoomed in and cropped my composition down to focus closely on this section. Well, the reason why I've chosen this composition and positioned this avocado tree on the right hand side with the dark foliage of the leaves and branches connecting to it, filling up most of the upper third of my painting, is because I'm using a traditional compositional technique known as framing, where this dark visual mass frames the light section in the middle of my painting, much like when you put your painting in a physical frame. A good frame will help add focus to your painting, as well as giving it a more important and aesthetic appearance. So by including this tree, it helps add tonal contrast to the lights in the middle section of my painting, drawing more focus to them as a result. In order to create this light green glow of the backlit foliage, I'm applying a thinned down mix of English green light and cadmium yellow to these sections of the canvas. By applying a thin wash of these colours, it allows for the lightness of the canvas to shine through the translucent paint, enabling me to paint these colours with their full chroma, instead of adding titanium white to lighten them, which would as a result make the colours a bit duller and chalkier. So in a sense I'm using the oil paint in these areas in the same way a watercolourist would use watercolour. In order to create this effect, it's important to apply this wash early on and avoid painting over these areas that you want to make look like the sun is shining through the leaves, as this effect is a bit difficult to get back. Here I'm painting in this brick wall behind the banana trees. The left hand side of this wall is covered in concrete and has a dark brown colour, but on the right hand side some of the red bricks are showing through, which adds a nice contrast to the greens of the foliage, as red and green are complementary colours, so in other words they sit directly opposite each other on the colour wheel, so when painted side by side they make the other colour appear even more vibrant. I'm starting to push the dark values darker in the avocado tree foliage in a few areas which are a bit further away and in shadow. The darks in this foreground tree help make the light areas in the foliage look even brighter due to simultaneous contrast, which basically means if you surround a light tonal value with dark values, the light values will appear lighter than if they were surrounded by other light values. And there's some really mind-blowing examples of this concept online. It can completely change your opinion of how dark or how bright a certain colour is once it's surrounded by other colours and other values. It's good to be aware of this tool when painting, as I will never be able to get anywhere near the level of brightness created by the sun shining through these leaves with my paint, but by painting the values in the scene according to the tonal range that my palette allows, and through the use of contrast in tonal value and colour temperature and hue, I can still create a convincing light effect within my painting, as everything is relative to what is next to it within the scene. Also, at the end of the day, when people do view your painting, it will likely be seen in a gallery context, in a frame, in a well-lit room, rather than someone holding it up to the evening sun and comparing the two. So for this reason, I don't worry about trying to mix the exact colours and the exact tonal values that I see in nature, but rather I try and focus on capturing the relationships between them. When painting trees which are backlit, you'll generally find a similar effect in the leaves to which you can see in the banana trees, with the thinner areas of foliage having a golden glow as the sunlight shines through the translucent body of the leaf. Where these breaks in the body of the leaves are, I paint the surrounding sections with a light golden yellow hue before painting the light value of the sky breaking through the gap. I first became consciously aware of this technique when looking at some paintings by Henri Nicolas Venet, who was a French painter who moved to Brazil in the 1800s and painted some really beautiful landscapes, most of which feature trees which are backlit by a low sun. And in general, this compositional choice was popular with many landscapes from this period in history all over the world. They would choose to paint scenes facing towards the sun, where the tonal values are most dramatic, with the deep darks in the foreground and the lightest lights being the sunlight in the sky normally breaking through some foliage or branches of the foreground tree, as opposed to painting away from the sun, where the contrasts in tonal values are typically lower, with the scene often appearing more colourful, typically with deeper blues in the sky and richer purples in the shadows. As much as I've tried to keep my initial thin wash for the lightest sections of the illuminated foliage unchanged throughout the duration of my painting, I find there is inevitably a bit of push and pull where I need to layer some light paint over dark paint in a few areas, and for this I'm finding the English green light paint that I bought here in Brazil a really useful addition to my colour palette, and it is definitely a colour I'm going to keep on my colour palette for landscape painting in the future, as it's a yellowish green which is high in value and chroma, so it's perfect for painting these light sections of backlit foliage. This narrow tree that I'm painting here is a papaya tree, known locally in Brazil as pé de mamão. This fruit is a very common breakfast here in Brazil, which I have enjoyed on many occasions. The tree has a straight trunk, and then these thin branches which curve upwards with broad, jagged leaves on the end, which meet at the top to create a sort of canopy of leaves facing perpendicular to the sky. And in fact, this tree is very young, and over time it will become much taller and thicker, with the main green trunk becoming a light, almost white, pale brown colour. In a way, the young tree looks a bit like a stick person with multiple arms and no legs, or a bit like a candle holder. I find it really helps to observe and abstract and give personalities to the foliage in your painting, as it will be easier for you to paint it more accurately this way, as it can be quite easy to get lost in the seemingly countless numbers of leaves and branches. So by giving the trees and the branches a bit of personality, you're more likely to identify them and paint them to a higher standard. And I hope watching me work on this is encouraging you to attempt to paint a backlit scene, as I find they often make some of the most powerful compositions. And backlit scenes can be notoriously difficult to photograph. I'm sure you've probably seen a beautiful sunset and decided to snap a photo, perhaps to show to a friend or share online, and frustratingly your photo doesn't look nearly as nice as what you see with your eyes. The reason for this is when the sun is low in the sky, like it is here, the extreme brightness of the sun is too much for your camera to process. And if you try and focus on the sky, anything slightly dark in the foreground becomes black and all subtleties in colour and detail are lost. Whereas if you try and focus on the foreground, the sky appears white and all those beautiful colours in the sky are lost. So the advantage of painting from life is I can still see the colours in both the sky and the foreground, and as a result I can paint a more beautiful image. Here I'm adding some bluer greens to the leaves in the thicker sections of the avocado tree foliage, as the sky overhead has a deeper blue hue than it does closer to the horizon, and many of the leaves which are facing towards the sky are receiving this blue reflected light from the sky. The bluish green also contrasts nicely against the yellowish greens in the thinner areas of the foliage, adding some variety to this mass of foliage. In general, I always try and look for and even exaggerate the shifts in shades of green in a scene like this, as too much of the same green colour can make the scene look a bit boring and cannot be that pleasant on the eye. As I refine the shadows and the dappled light on the foreground, I'm making the shadow edges a bit softer the closer they get to the foreground, as cast shadows are always sharpest where they are closest to the object which is cast in the shadow. I'm also building up the highlights with thicker paint than in the shadows, as one quality of oil paint is that it creates physical ridges and texture to the surface, which can catch the light at certain angles. So in general, by keeping the shadows thin, you avoid risking a brush stroke in the shadows looking too light because the paint texture is catching the light. However, texture in the lights is more desirable, as this is where our eyes are naturally drawn to when we look at nature in real life. As I add more details to the foliage and foreground sections which are in shadow, I'm trying to be careful not to overdo the shifts in tonal values within these sections, as nothing in the shadow section competes in brightness of value to the areas in the light sections, and I want to hold on to the overall shadow pattern of the composition. There is a natural tendency when painting the shadows to start painting the details such as leaves catching a bit of reflected light to be far too light, as the more we look into the shadows, the wider our eyes open and adjust to see the details in the dark, and subtle shifts in tonal value can appear greater due to the concept of simultaneous contrast, which I mentioned earlier. So for this reason, I really recommend squinting at the scene and at your painting, and also group in the colours for the light areas together on your palette and the shadow colours together on a different area of your palette.
So I hope you enjoyed that video of me painting here in Brazil. It's been quite fun trying to get that backlight shining through the banana trees and also this big avocado tree in the foreground. If you enjoyed that, please do give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next video.